Okay, let's start with Chapter 5, Organizational Costing and Profit Analysis. So we have to make a distinction here between financial accounting and managerial accounting. And financial accounting is, the income statement, the balance sheet. You're really looking at financial position, you're reporting to the board, you're reporting to outside organizations. Uh, you have to adhere to external standards for reporting, generally accepted accounting principles. You're looking at monthly reporting, maybe quarterly, depending. Managerial accounting, you're using accounting data to really run the organization, right? I consider it the fun stuff. And it's really financial reporting reports the results. Managerial accounting you use to improve the results, to really understand the organization, make changes, make improvements. There aren't, I mean, there's principles and how you do things, but there isn't really these external standards. I mean, obviously, there's accepted things, but there's no reporting agency that's going to say, "Oh, you know, you have to revise your internal methods." The managerial accounting is what works for your organization, based on a lot of the principles that we're going to talk about. It's really, really important to the success of any organization, healthcare especially. So I used to do some flying. I like to do airplane analogies, so you'll just have to forgive me. So why measure costs? Why measure profit? Why do I need to break even? Well, if you were flying with me back in the day, or anybody today, wouldn't you want the pilot to know their fuel level? Probably important thing. Wouldn't you want them to know the direction of flight? Yeah. Wouldn't you want them to know their altitude? Yeah, you probably would. So there's kind of a little bit analogous. It's probably a little nerdy of me, but you got your moving map. Where am I relative to my flight plan? It's kind of like your budget reporting. You know, fuel gauge. How long can I stay aloft? Your cash altimeter. How high am I? Maybe your days in cash. Vertical speed. How am I ascending or descending? Kind of cost consumption, et cetera, et cetera. So it's dashboard metrics. It may seem, maybe you're already in an organization and you get this all the time, but from where I came from 40 years ago when we started. I mean, we were literally like barnstormers flying in the 1920s with maybe a compass and a level indicator, a string hanging from the top of the plane to tell you which way you're turning bank. So we're luckily in this day and age, you've got a full set of financial indicators and instruments to help guide you on your path. There's This is an excerpt from a slide deck for next week. Where do these kind of cost analytics help you? Finance and strategy, so you're making informed decisions. Contract negotiations. Do you know your costs? That'll be a major focus of the class. How do I negotiate with payers on the reimbursement for a total hip or a open heart surgery if I don't know what it costs me to perform that. Uh, Understanding cost behavior for planning, for just operations, process improvement, etc. So these are all have good, solid cost accounting at its core. How do we put it to work? Probably different ways we can put cost accounting to work. Obviously, service line analytics, you know, cost cost providing services, not only a specific procedure level, but a cost entire course of care. So it's not just the total. Maybe it's management of a condition. It's not just the total hip surgery, but the rehab, the preoperative work, the post-operative, the entire spectrum of care. How do we and then maybe it's service line of orthopedics, the entire spectrum of everything to do with orthopedics or cardiology or urology or cancer treatment, oncology. So we've got the ability to now go from specific procedures to a service line, OB, et cetera, et cetera. Talked about financial planning a little bit, how important that is. Super important is analytics at the physician level. So how does you know Dr. Smith? What's his? How does his or her costs in managing a condition compared to Dr. Jones? That's super important. Does Doctor Again, you're going to hear a lot of orthopedic references because that was my most recent background. You know, does Dr. Smith uses the antibiotic cement that costs so much more than the non-antibiotic cement, and is it really clinically justified in the literature? The cost of certain bandages, biological based bandages, ridiculously expensive. And I believe the clinical data is suggesting that there's no really better or worse. Any clinicians in the audience, you know, forgive me if I overstate anything clinically, but whether I'm right or wrong about a specific issue, a specific bandages or whatever, or the efficacy of the concept's the same. Um, what are the cost profiles of one physician versus another? Their practice patterns, their use of supplies, their protocols, and you know we tie that into quality and is it value? And then pricing and contracting kind of touched on that a little bit. Um, how do we how do we negotiate with Blue Cross Blue Shield if we don't have a fundamental understanding of our cost structure for a given procedure, course of care, etc. Okay, so again, it's critical. Um, these top notes are kind of from the book. I feel honor bound. Just a general theme. The book, the textbook is more theoretical, and I feel obliged since you bought the textbook and it's recommended by the professors to pay homage to it. Um, and but I'm going to not be shy about just kind of deviating from the textbook where I think it's maybe too theoretical or it's not really how it's done in the real world. There's nothing to get excited about. Um, with respect to that, I'm giving you a very much of a hands-on view of the world. But I do think it's important to honor, the text in a few different ways. So costs, at the end of the day, cost is an expenditure of resources. So let's just simplify that. Now, there's a lot of different ways to classify them, but we don't need to get too fancy. At the end of the day, if you're expending a resource, it's a cost. Whether that be depreciation, where you're spreading that expenditure over 5 years, or if it's just labor. I paid for 2 weeks of labor for this nurse, this administrator, or whether it's bandages or the cost to clean. So there are many ways to define costs. A primary one, and the primary one we're going to do this week, is the costs and volumes. It's related to their volume. So cost as it relates to volume. And we basically call this, it's the underlying cost structure. Okay, how is the structure of providing that service? What's the cost structure? So in this context, we can categorize them a number of ways. A fixed costs are independent volume over a relevant range, and we'll get we'll define that a little bit more. But it's basically over a certain range of volume, your costs aren't going to change. Your rent, right? And again, we'll dive into this a little more detail in a minute. Variable costs change as volume changes on a per unit basis, typically in a linear fashion. You use more supplies, the more patients, given flu shots, the more patients you see, the more flu shot medicine you buy. Uh, More patients you see, potentially the more labor on a larger scale. Semi-fixed, they increase as volume increase, but not in a linear fashion, not in a direct fashion. And again, we'll talk more in a second. Marginal costs, the top three are kind of a accountant's view. I'm a CPA. That's how we think of the world. Marginal cost is an economist view of the world, and it's a little different. It's the cost of providing the next unit of service. So the economists don't really necessarily think in terms of fixed, variable, and semi. They think of it as the next unit of service, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So accountants, we kind of think of, again, we think of the fixed cost. This isn't going to change over time, or over, excuse me, over a degree of volume. So you've got the president of a hospital, whether you see 100 patients a day in the OR or 200 patients a day in the OR or in the ER, the cost is going to be the same, right? That's a fixed cost. And again, I'm going to beat it to death. Next slide. So we're really focused a lot on variable costs. As we see more patients in the emergency room, we're going to use more supplies. As we see more patients in the operating room, we're going to use more saline, we're going to use more gas, we're going to use more bandages, more sponges. If we're putting a knee implant in there, more implants, etc. Economists think of it as what's the cost of providing the next unit of service. So it's very analogous to variable costs, but it's not quite the same. So, and here's kind of the a good way to think about it. So let's talk about FedEx. We've all sent things FedEx, right, or received something from FedEx. So if I was had been doing the financial model for FedEx, I would have said, okay, here's the fixed costs. We need what $200 million in trucks, buildings, maybe airplanes, whatever the number was, and then those are our fixed costs. We're we're doing a business plan, and then our variable costs are going to be okay. Labor and gas, right, to deliver the packages. So I would have done a model that had fixed costs, and then I would have done variable costs depending on as the packages increase, the the variable costs get higher. The economists would have said the marginal cost of delivering the first package is $200 million because I can't deliver the first package until I have all that infrastructure in place. So the economist says, in order to deliver that first package, I need a CEO, I need a CFO, I need offices in every major city in the country, probably mid-size. I need a fleet of trucks, etc. So the marginal cost of that first package FedEx ever delivered was enormous. The second dropped, right? The second package they delivered was, you know, gas and labor. So, why am I confusing you with these distinctions? Because there's some overlap. There's some people that use them interchangeably, and they really shouldn't. They're distinct concepts. We're we're going to focus just on fixed, variable, understanding semi-fixed. But I know that uh, you were taught some profit maximization in the first class, where we maximize profit when marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Not super applicable, really, in healthcare because you can't really increase your production like McDonald's can, right? Like you just don't have control of your revenue. You're As we'll find out, you don't have control. You can't just raise and lower the cost of you know your quarter pounder. Like you know you can't just say, okay, I'm going to raise my cost of my hip replacement tomorrow. You've got contracts. The government has told you what they're going to pay. So it's you just can't maximize profits with that simple formula. Okay, enough of that digression. Um, so let's talk about the relevant range because it's applicable for fixed costs. So no costs are fixed throughout an infinite range of volume. So if you go out far enough, no cost is fixed, right? You might need more buildings. You might administrative. You might need additional bodies. You might need you start out small administrative structure. Then you need more. You need a controller. In finance, you need a director of operations. You need a strategic planning, whatever. You need more buildings. You need more equipment. So we I'm not going to hit this too hard in the exercises, but you do need to understand the concept. So in all these studies, if I'm doing a business plan, I would define a relevant range. You know, and so these fixed costs are will take us through X level of volume, and it's very important if you're really doing a business plan and you're seeking investors and everything to define the relevant range for our purposes. this will be most of the exercise on it. So another simple definition: the range of volume expected over some planning period where fixed costs do not change. So it's a little circular. Uh, so you define in your business plan. Okay, we can handle. We're doing. My friend is the CEO of a urgent care clinics. Okay, we can handle so much volume. I'm just going to pick a number. We can handle 10,000 patients a year per clinic. If we go above that, so the relevant range is from 1 to 10,000. Above that, we need to open up a second clinic. So, from in this example, from 1 to 10,000, the fixed costs don't change. We go to 11, we go to 10,001, we need a second clinic. Uh, Again, the official detailed accounting, the normal range of volume or normal amount of activity, which total amount of a company's fixed costs will not change. It's never 0 to X. Because if you had zero, if you projected zero volume, right, you wouldn't do the plan. So, be a little pedantic, a little accounting nerdy, but basically, if it's always 1 to something, because zero, if I expected zero volume, I wouldn't go ahead with the project, right? So, just to show you, this is something from a business plan that I did, and we give some terminology and how you might work this. We're going to be talking about break even. We're going to be jumping into that projected scenario. That would be called our base case. Um, in this business plan, we called it projected scenario. So this is the summary. So the break even, which we'll learn about in a minute. So I said here's the volume that we need to do to break even. So we're just breaking even. There's no profit. We're covering our costs. Here's our projected. This would be our base case projected. We're going to learn about that in a second. And then our capacity, that would be like the top end of our relevant range. Okay. So we're going to say at this fixed cost level, based on what we built for infrastructure for this company, our capacity, essentially the high end of the relevant range, is 46,098 visits. I think this was for a bar exercise studio, a national company. I did the financial plan for it. So other things we might do just for fun, um, we might say what's our market share at these different scenarios. And again, this is super helpful. You're an investor. You're in this one summary. I can say, okay, my projected year one is below break even. I'm going to lose money. My projected year two is above break even. I'm starting to make money. I still have plenty of upside capacity. Projected year three, year four, I'm making some money. Break even market share, it frames up to, I don't have to be 100% market share. There's a famous case. I don't know if I talk about it later or a slide, but an airline, it's a Harvard Business School case. They hit all their projected scenarios, but they never made money because they never defined their break even point. So they were well within plan, but nobody. I mean, it's famous. I studied it in when I got my MBA. It's a true story. So they hit all their projections, but nobody ever bothered to say what their break even was. It's hard to believe, but I guess it's true. So then we defined it was market share. We did some revenue. We did some expenses. Break even obviously is zero by definition. Net income, we're going to lose that much money the first year and then make some money. So you can see how what we're about to delve into, how you might use it, and how the relevant range is relevant, I guess, for lack of a better word. Okay, so let's repeat this and let's give a bit more examples. Fixed costs are independent of volume over relevant range. So rent, right? A lot of your service contracts, you got a piece of equipment. I just signed a HVAC contract a few weeks ago. The HVA, the heating and air conditioning people don't care how many patients we see in our surgery center. They want to come in quarterly. We want the machine serviced and looked at, filters changed, yada yada. They're going to come in quarterly, no matter we see, you know, 3,000 patients a quarter or 1,000 patients a quarter. Service contracts, okay, are like that. Managerial labor, I still need, administrator. I still need, receptionist, et cetera, et cetera. Some labor like that. Okay, variable, it changes as volume changes on a per unit basis. So that's the key on a per unit basis, really in a linear fashion. So, PPE, still relevant, drugs, staffing costs, medical supplies, billing service. The more units of this I serve or produce or supply, the more surgeries, the more deliveries, the more some of these costs are going to go up. Semi fixed, they increase in chunks within a relevant range. It's almost like a range within a range. So nursing costs may be like that. If I've got a minimum of two nurses per floor, regardless of patient volume, and then I'm going to make up the numbers, but we had this when I was at the finance department of a hospital years ago. So let's say I need a minimum of two, just state regs, and then I'm just going to make up numbers. Those two can handle up to 10 patients in a census. And then if I get an 11th patient, I need another RN, and that'll take me up to whatever 15 patients census. So it's kind of stepped up in chunks. Again, we talked about marginal costs and kind of beat it to death. They don't really make these fixed and variable and semi-fixed. They just say what's the cost of providing the next service. Okay, so let's talk about ways that we would define an underlying cost structure. So I'm going to talk about different ways that we do this. Okay, and one is the one we're going to focus mostly on is a model format. Okay, we're going to build models. We're not going to build solutions. So you might say rent utilities are fixed. We might say that there's some element of staffing that's fixed. Front desk, a medical assistant, an X-ray tech, a nurse practitioner. So this is my friend's urgent care. They need in order to open the door, you need a front desk person, a medical assistant, X-ray tech, and nurse practitioner, right? So he's going to consider those costs of a specific clinic fixed. And then the variable costs in his case might be $20 of supplies per patient, and then billing costs of $5. So we have a model format that we define as we define our fixed costs, and then as the volume goes up, the variable costs will go up. $25 a patient, and this will be what we hit hard. You may want to do it formulaically, and it's very simple. 300,000 plus $25 times the number of visits, and then average costs. Total cost divided by visit. You might want to do it in a table. I don't know that anyone really does it, but the book covers it. Maybe some people prefer to see things in a table. More power to them. So you might create a table format that has your fixed costs and then the variable costs increasing at $25 times the number of visits. And you might have total costs, and then you might do your average cost per visit. And the average cost declines. On a note on formulas and things in this class, you're going to have to be comfortable with middle school math. There's going to be, you know, solving for x. And there's no calculus. There's no, linear algebra. Or I sorry, there's linear algebra, but there's no advanced math here. So we'll have a few formulas that we construct within a model. Then you can do it graphically. The first time I taught the class, I had some graphics homework, but no, many of the students had no idea how to do a graph in Excel, and it became an Excel graph lesson. And I'm not here to teach Excel. I'm a teacher to good modeling concepts using Excel, but so we're just understand the concept. I do a lot of graphs. I frame up a lot of my work in graphs because it's intuitive to understand, and people like graphs, and all the more power to it. So in this case, this is the fourth way of defining a cost structure. You have your fixed costs, right? Your y-intercept from middle school, and then you have your variable costs which start at zero, and as volume increases, this is what I mean by increase in a linear fashion, right? They increase in a linear fashion. So you got whatever in this case, $25 is basically the slope of the line, right? And if you add the fixed costs and the variable costs together, you get your total costs, and the slope is the same. So this is just simple what we learned in middle school. And again, I do a lot of graphing of results because it's there are people that, right, different learners. Some people like table formats, some like models, formulas. A lot of people like graphs. Okay, so let's look at an example from how this might look. Um, we might say rent and utilities, um, introducing semi-fixed costs. Again, I'm not going to beat it to death. Rent and utilities, $30,000. Staffing, that a fixed level of staffing, front desk and X-ray. Let's say in this example, so we have a total fixed cost of 130,000. And then semi-fixed, we might say, hey, from 1 to 10,000 visits, we need a medical assistant and nurse practitioner. Let's say it's 170K. And then from 10,001 to 25,000 visits, we need a second medical assistant and a second nurse practitioner. So that's 170. and then we have our variable costs. So in the model, you would build in if statements and things of that nature, so that when volume exceeded 10,000, this 170 kicks in. Formulaically, you know, you would say something to the effect of 130 plus $25, 130,000 plus $25 times the number of visits, plus if visits less than 10,001, 170,000, if over else 340. That's kind of how a computer would do it. And then if you did your table, you would you would frame it up, and then let's say over 10,000, you hit to 340, and then you can see the average declines because you're leveraging those fixed costs over more volume. Um, and then your graph cost structure might look like this. You get a jump. I did it in groups of 1,000, but essentially over 10,000, you get a jump for that second nurse practitioner and second MA, right? So your variable costs are linear, your fixed costs, right, don't change, but your semi fixed, right, they jump with that extra two bodies, and then the total is the addition of the two. Um, so the book cost volume profit analysis, I guess technical term. I just like the term pro forma financials. So what we're doing is we're looking at volume and cost and profit. So it's technically cost volume profit analysis. We're going to just use the term. We're creating pro forma financials. So let's do a very simple. Right, we have this Atlanta. They assume fixed costs of 4.9. They do variable costs of 2 million. Their total cost is 7 million. As example 5.3 in the text. So what's the variable cost rate? So there's a couple different ways. You build it up from the ground up by what is this patient going to use for every visit. But there's typically what we do that, but a lot of times we look at other experience, and we say, what have we spent? What do we think we're going to spend in kind of in our base case scenario, and then we divide the variable costs, those whatever we've defined it as, our medical supplies, whatever, and we're going to divide it by the volume, and we're going to come up with an average price per visit. I mean, it just depends on the nature of the beast. Something like a surgery center, which I'm involved in, a back injection, the supplies are $50. A total hip, total knee implant, you're looking, $5,000 all in. So the average really doesn't mean a lot. You might do an average within a category, but to say our average cost is whatever, when you have such a knee scope, very minimal supplies, a back injection, again minimal, versus a spinal fusion where you have a very expensive cage. So, but ultimately, for our purposes, you're going to be given some kind of a variable cost rate. So, again, the book kind of likes the table format. So you have your fixed costs, you have your variable costs, you have your total costs. The base case, best guess. Uh, it's really most often used approach. I like probability models. I'm really nerding out here, being a little pedantic, but let's just call it best guess, base case. Again, in this example, we use projected scenario, just a little fancier term, all mean the same thing. Um, so we've defined the cost structure, average costs, in this nice table format. Okay, so why do we need to? Let's talk about base case, projected scenario, best guess. Again, we're gonna just use the term base case. Why do we do that? Why do we need to establish it? It's really kind of for pricing. If you really need to focus on just like I did in that example I showed you. What is our base case? What are we most confident that's going to happen? Okay, and then um, then with pricing, we're going to get a lot more sophisticated with pricing. But if you if you very simple, if you take your average cost based on your base case, right, plus your profit, you divide that by volume, that's going to be your price, right? And then there's also what the market will bear. So, what is our average cost per unit, and then compare it to what we think the market will bear given other examples. So, when Apple came out with the iPhone, they pretty much used, number one, right? There was no market, the smartphone. I mean, there's the BlackBerry, but you probably don't even remember what that is. But for the large part, they were creating a whole new product category. Um, just and so they probably, I don't know for a fact, but I'm assuming they figured out in very much detail what it would cost to make the phone, and then they decided how much money do we want to make on the phone, and let's price it. Now, Google comes out with its phone. It's doing that, but it's also factoring in what will the market bear. Okay, we're Google. We have our phone, unless an Android phone, whatever. I've never owned anything but an iPhone. Um, we can do number one, but if we're charging more than Apple, it's probably not going to be very successful. So it may be the case that you're just like, hey, here's a product. Apple has a phone. It's pretty expensive. Um, we can build it a lot cheaper, and we'll go in between the middle. The key really isn't. The key is you need to understand your cost structure before you, right, venture into a new product or a new service, right? I mean, that's the key here. Um, so that you can understand that you can make a profit in selling it. So let's assume for this example it's $100 price per visit. So we'll start with the table format, and so we have our costs, we have our revenue, and then we take our revenue less our total costs to create our profit. So my little airplane analogy here. So you know below 70,000 volume visits, right? We're losing money. So probably not a long term good thing if we use our airplane analogy. That profit and losses, we're going to crash the plane. We're going to go bankrupt. But then above that, we start showing some profit. Again, um, it seems quaint, but again, Harvard Business School study. They they started an airline. They did some projections on volume. They never defined any of this stuff. Um, if a graphical format, So we have our volume, our revenues, this green line. We have our total costs. It begins with our fixed costs. It goes up, right? And then this red below here is profit, or sorry, is loss. We're losing money, and above here, this in the black, we're profit. Slope of the line is your variable costs per unit. So AX plus, right? AX plus BY equals C. Isn't that right? From middle school. Um, so AX, A is our slope, X is our volume, C is our y-intercept. So that's your graphical analysis. Um, so what we're going to focus is on modeling using a P&L uh, statement format. Uh, it looks like an income statement, like what you should have learned in the first finance class. Um, we're going to call it a pro forma as if it's a projection. And the other thing we're going to do, we're going to try as much as possible, is we're going to try to define our contribution margin. So we're going to define contribution margin. So in this format, we would take our revenue less our variable costs. That would give us our contribution margin. And then less our fixed costs equals our profit and loss. Uh, if you're ever doing any kind of pro forma work, to the extent that you can define contribution margin, you always should. It provides really valuable information. So, contribution margin is defined as the difference between revenue and variable cost. The contribution per unit is defined as the difference between revenue per unit and variable cost per unit. Okay? And the reason is because the per unit amount of revenue, what it is it's what is contributes. So what each sale, what each service contributes to covering fixed costs and profitability, right? So every volume, everything we do, we get a little bit of revenue, we expend a little bit of variable costs, and what's left over, you might it might be referred to as gross profit. Some people call it, I just call it contribution margin per unit. And what it contributes to covering those fixed costs and then profit. I threw this in, this is a classic ACT type question. Maybe people are intimidated by revenue and expense, and oh my God, I'm intimidated by finance. You don't need to be. All this is just simple math. Um, I want to break the record of the longest flight in a Cessna 172. That's what I used to fly without stopping. Current record's 2,000 miles. Think of that's fixed costs. My plane flies at 100 miles an hour. There's a 28 mile an hour headwind. How many hours will it take me to break the record? Right? So my fixed cost is like the current record. 100 miles an hour is like my revenue. The 28 mile headwind is like my variable costs. Plane's going 100, but it's into a 28 mile headwind. So every hour I fly, I'm just contributing 72 miles to my record. So to break the record, I need to I need to hit 2,000 miles divided by 72 hours. It's going to take me 27.78 hours to break that record. And now the question is that realistic? Can I stay awake for that long? Basically, what Charles Lindbergh had to figure out when he flew across the Atlantic Ocean in whatever 1927. Could he stay awake for that long? My case, I couldn't, but let's say I did. And then every hour additionally I flew, I would contribute another 72 miles. So it's you don't need to be intimidated with dollar signs in it. It's just a very simple concept. So what is a even point, and why is it, I mean we talked about why it's so important to know, but let's go over it again. The break even is where the volume level where profit equals zero. That's break even. Why I need to know it. It helps develop the validity of my base case. So if we go back to the other example, you see I defined my base case relative to projections, right? So I defined break even relative to my projections relative to my capacity. So it helped me gut check the realistic nature of my financial model. I gave you the airline example from Harvard Business School already. There's other ways to define it too. It's just such whenever you're doing any kind of, I mean I don't know how many business plans I've done, but it's just like one of the most key things that everyone wants to know. At what point do we have enough volume where we're not losing money? So this is a business plan I wrote. This company is so I mean I don't, this is so long ago. They're an active company. So one of the things they wanted to know the break even in terms of time. How long would it take us? So you see that I've done overhead. That would be my our fixed costs, right? It's just it's just a different terminology basically for fixed costs overhead. And then I did the contribution margin, total contribution margin. And here I just defined it in terms of how long it would take us to break even. But you can understand the importance of defining that. And then here we did some scenarios. In this scenario, we could how would we break even faster? And this was what 20 months. And we looked at okay, if we outsourced our sales force, if we didn't hire people, but we used brokers and we converted that fixed cost to a variable cost, so we actually kind of lower our contribution margin because we're increasing our variable costs, but we've also lowered our fixed costs. We determined we could hit break even, 4 months sooner. And so then you evaluate. I mean, a lot of these business plans, you're looking at the data to determine how you should approach something. And so I can't remember what was decided to be quite honest with you, but you're running scenarios, and one of the things the venture capitalists were interested is how can we get to break even sooner. Okay, so how do we compute break even? Fundamentally important. It's very simple. We take our fixed cost divided by our contribution margin per unit, right? So, sorry, pretty simple. So we on our contribution per margin per unit, right? It's just our per unit revenue less our per unit cost, simply price less variable cost per unit. Fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit. I would suggest memorizing that. It's a fundamental concept in the class. So we definitely want to understand that. So what is break even? Again, the volume where profit equals zero. So revenue equals the example believe it's in the book, $100 per visit, expense cost structure. So we had variable costs. What the textbook is they defined, they added up these costs and then they divided by $75,000 or sorry, 75,000 visits to come up with a variable cost rate. So again, earlier I mentioned you can build it up from the ground up. Sometimes that's practical, sometimes that's not, or you can model it and then come up with kind of a baseline assumption and then back into the per unit price. Um, so you notice in management staffing, they define it all as fixed costs. This coordinator, they kind of said, well, we need so many for a certain level of volume, so that 598 of that million is fixed. And then as we grow with volume, we need more. The staffing specialist was all fixed. Technician was split. And you have that with staffing a lot. We kind of talked about that with the nursing example. I'll keep the examples a lot simpler than this. But again, you have staffing is a hybrid, right? Because you need certain staff there no matter how many patients come through the door. So the by definition, you had fixed costs. We want to know where the break even is. Again, it's where the profit equals zero. So we had fixed costs of 4.9 million. We had variable costs defined as 2.1 million at 75,000 visits. So the variable cost per visit was 2.1 divided by 75,000 or $28.18. We had average cost per visit all in 94. Um, but we want to know what our break even is, and our revenue was $100 a visit. So our contribution margin per visit was $100 minus the $28.18. Our contribution margin per visit was $71.82, right? And our break even then is fixed cost divided by the contribution margin per unit, 4,000,009, etc., divided by 7182 equals 69,165. So that's where our break even is, right? So we've identified our break even at 69,165. We want to do it graphically. It's where the total cost line crosses the revenue line. So if we were to do that graphically, um, we could plot it on a graph, and we're revenue, right? There's no profit. We're losing money, we're making money right here, we're break even. Um, and then what we're going to be focused on is we're going to be doing it in a model format. And so we're going to use good modeling techniques. We're going to set out an assumption table: volume, revenue, variable costs, fixed costs. Um, when I do my assumption tables. I do, and then I separate that from my actual pro forma statement. I label my models. This is Atlanta Urgent Care model. It's the base case. It's dated. I try to do that on all my models. So if I'm looking at a printout a year later, I know what the hell I'm looking at. I use a convention that all my assumptions are in blue, the color blue. So I look at this immediately and I know that everything blue was an assumption in the model. Everything black was something that was calculated by the model. I haven't embedded any formulas. I haven't embedded any assumptions into my formulas. We'll look into that in a second. Uh, why why color code? Believe me, you go back 3 months later and you look at a model, you you see blue numbers, you immediately know those are assumptions, not formulas. Makes life a whole lot easier. You're making a presentation in front of the CEO or the board, and they ask you, well, Dave, what if you change the volume to 80,000? You see that blue number, you zero in on there in the heat of you're nervous, you're in front of a board, you're in front of your boss, you see that blue, you know it's an assumption, you change it. You know not to touch anything in black. Those are results of the model. Makes it a life is a heck of a lot easier if you follow good modeling practices. Okay, so let's look at construction anatomy of an Excel model. So I've done, and you're going to use this for the homework. So I've got my volume. It's an assumption. So it's in blue. It's a hard coded number in an assumption. My revenue, it's an assumption. Variable cost, it's an assumption. Maybe I have some notes here. I like to put notes. Where did this come from? That's my base case. Where'd revenue come from? I'm not going to ask you to do this, but it's a good habit to get into. Per market survey with Blue Cross, whatever. Variable cost unit. See detailed schedule A. So maybe that detailed schedule A is something that looks like this. Fixed cost. Again, see detailed schedule B. Again, maybe it's something that looks like this. And that's way, again, if I'm looking at this 3 months later, or if somebody really wants to get in the weeds, they can, look at footnote. When I do these business plans or have done them, absolutely everything would be noted. And it would say, where did I get this from? What was the basis for it? And then the private equity newly minted MBAs and their laptops could go look at Schedule B and dig into it. Contribution revenue per sorry, revenue per visit less variable cost per visit. I might note that just in case people forgot. Fixed break even, fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit. Okay, so let's look at this. I did these. Now my formula, contribution margin per visit, E6 minus E7. E6 is revenue minus E7 is variable cost. That's my formula. I do not write 100 minus 28.18. If you do that, you're going to get a reduction. Okay, that's not a model. If I'm in a meeting and the CEO says, "What if I change it to 80,000?" I want to be able to change that 75 to 80 and get a result. I won't have to be looking into all these formulas where I put 100 minus 28.18. You'll never in a complicated model, the ones that I've built, you'll never in 100 years find all your embedded assumptions in, you know, you'll miss something. So you never embed assumptions into formulas. You'll make mistakes like in the the real estate broker made, and that was a simple model. Break even, E8 fixed cost divided by E9, my contribution margin formula. Revenue, E5 volume times E6 is revenue less variable costs. minus E7, variable cost per unit, times volume of 75, which is E5. Contribution margin E13, less, um, well, less E14. I define variable costs as a negative. It's the difference between revenue and variable costs. Make sure in the homework you get that concept. Contribution margin is revenue less variable costs. Some people will define variable costs as a positive number, say revenue minus. Some will define revenue as a negative number and say revenue plus. But, I don't get all anal retentive about how people like seeing the negative expense. Some people like it seen as a positive. The thing that you have to understand is revenue less variable costs equals contribution margin. So, okay, the exact formula depends on whether you define variable as a negative number or not. And then you subtract your fixed costs, and profit equals contribution margin less your fixed costs. So this basically is how you do the homework. You do not embed any formulas, nowhere, or assumptions. Sorry, you do not embed any assumptions, right? I have defined the assumptions clearly. I've defined the formulas clearly. I can make any change, and I will get a solution. The CEO says, "What if we charge $95?" I change 100 to 95. Boom, I'm done. Okay. We can also modeling fun. Let's say you want to test it. So we build our model, and then, it says 69 is when our break even. We could just change our volume to 69.15 in our model and see if the profit loss comes to zero, right? Simple. That's why we build models, not solutions. Okay, the textbook gets into this thing about economic break even. I really don't like that term. Volume at a defined profit level. I forget it. I Break even is where profit equals zero. Let's not complicate world economists. This is why people don't like economists. Sorry. Um, I, Break even means one thing. Let's not confuse it. Let's just say, uh, what's my volume to hit a desired profit? Okay. So if I want to hit a desired profit, it's very simple. I take the fixed costs plus the desired profit divided by the contribution margin per unit, right? So in the flying example, I want to break the record by, you know, X miles. I want to the record's 2,000. I want to go 2,100 miles. So let's again do our model. We'd have our volume, we'd have our revenue, variable costs, fixed costs. Now we have a desired profit. It's an assumption. We may change that. So it's in blue. It's our desired profit, right? So we did our model at 75,000, but now what we've said, well, our break even is 69,165 because we defined that. Desired profit is 70,558. Fixed cost plus desired profit divided by contribution margin per unit. And now, but our base case is still 75,000. So what it's saying, again, is providing information. Oh, our desired is 100. Our base case is giving us 419,000. That's pretty good. And now maybe you play with it. Maybe you say, well, maybe we should lower the base case to 71,000. Again, it's modeling, it's an interactive process. So, how, again, let's look at look at Excel. So the same as before, your break even is your fixed costs, right? Um, your E6 divided by your E8, your contribution margin per unit, right? And then volume to achieve profit, you take your E6, which is your fixed cost, plus your desired profit of 100,000, and then divided by E8, your contribution margin. Okay, so again, I'm giving you templates to do the homework. You're going to have a template, but I'm basically giving you the formula. And the beauty of this is you have an interactive model. Again, did it work? You go in your model and you plug in 70,558 as the volume. You get a profit of 100,000. My model works. Okay, um, so that concludes basic cost structure. And now we're just going to take a quick four-way into operating leverage. So I am going to, I think I'll just stop and take a pause, record a new video.